question to some extent about the nexus. So, does it exist? Probably in some shape, way, shape or form. What it is, how it works, what makes it tick, and how it looks in different countries. And I'll start from from my immediate right. So John Morrison, who's a renowned expert on all things terrorism, recently changed jobs. So you're no longer with UEL, but now with Roy Holloway. So John is also the founder of the Talking Terror podcast, which I suggest you all sign up to and listen to, because he's got some fantastic people out there who are actually spreading their knowledge on terrorism issues. Then I have Giovanni Giacalone from the Catholic University of the Sacred Heart in Milan, who, as you can imagine after this not so lengthy introduction, covered the Italian cases. And in the Italian case itself is a very peculiar case for any study of the crime-terror nexus or any study devoted to terrorism. And Giovanni, certainly I'll be looking to hear your insights. Then we have Olivier de France from IRIS in Paris, who led the French team, who contributed the highest number of cases. You won't be surprised that France, obviously, if you're talking any terrorism studies in Europe, if you're talking crime-terror nexus, you have to, France is the main pillar. And we had a prolific team working on the French front, and we'll be looking from Olivier we look forward to hearing your insights. And last but not least, we have a dynamic duo coming from the Ghent University of Wim Hardens and Tom Snaphan, who are going to look at the Belgian cases. Again, a smaller country, but a pretty big caseload that you gentlemen tackled and then you covered for us in the project. So essentially, the guys here are responsible for around 200 cases out of the 326 that are in the report. So you'll get a good snapshot of what this is about. I'm not saying the other 126 are not important, absolutely not. But this is the best probably snapshot that we could do in a nutshell. So I'll turn to you, gentlemen. Let me start with you, John. So let's go to the main question, the same question to each and every one of you. So crime-terror nexus in your country. What is it? What we should look forward to in terms of findings? What surprised you? What works? And is this moniker, the buzzword, does it work in this setting? So John, you go first.
Thank you, Casper. First of all, congratulations on the report, and you've put a lot of work in yourself, and you deserve a lot of credit for this. It's not an easy task managing all of us now, I have to say. And I'd also like to say, you say that we're responsible for these cases. I am not responsible for those cases, but it's one of the joys of this project is we get to look at the data. We get to look at all of these cases. We can come with an idea that, okay, there may be a crime-terror nexus there. But by being able to go into minute detail in these cases and look at various variables, we can see that within the UK case for 2015, and we have to be so specific when we're referring to our findings, this is for the people who were arrested in 2015. There wasn't really what we would have expected. There wasn't really a crime-terror nexus. Yes, there were people with criminal past there. There were people who had low-level offences when it came to drug possession, etc. There were people with higher-level offences like armed robbery. There were people who had been convicted for money laundering. One person who had been convicted for money laundering before. But as a whole, when we draw back, it's very easy to focus in on those case studies and say, oh, we've got this great example for you, Casper. It's this person here, he fits X, Y, and Z category. But when we look at it as a whole, we don't really have that. Because when we look at something like the crime-terror nexus, you're presuming that what enabled their criminal, what skills they were using within their previous criminality were being utilised as well within their terrorist activity. And we weren't really seeing that within the UK case. So when we draw back from it, yes, we actually didn't really see the crime-terror nexus that many may have expected. Now, if we took other years, we may have had other examples. We may have had more of an example of this, and I hope that this is where the project is going next, that we're able to look at future years, so get those funding bids in for that. But what we need to do when we're looking at these is Yes, we can overall look at these are cases of people who've been convicted under terrorism legislation. But we, within this database, and when we go deeper into this report and beyond, we need to differentiate between the different types of roles, between the different types of people here. We need to differentiate between those people who have been involved in an attack, those people who have been involved in the planning of attack, those people who may have been involved, and we have some cases of people convicted under terrorist legislation here who are in the same database as someone who is planning to carry out a major attack, and these people have sent over 150, 200 pounds to someone within Syria, and they're being convicted under terrorist legislation. So when we talk about it, and when we look at these individuals, we have to be able to break them down. But on your overall question about crime-terror nexus, we didn't really see it there within the 2015 arrestees in the UK case.
Thanks. Well, answering your question, no, we don't have in Italy a strong crime nexus link, but there is a point. Well, first of all, we do have some very interesting cases related to crime, which means that we had an Al-Qaeda related network in Sardinia, made up mainly of Pakistanis, that was linked to the 2009 Peshawar market bombing. We had the case of citizen of Kosovo that was linked to a group of armed robbers and to a local volcanic mosque. But keep in mind that out of 42 people, we only had 8 cases. And most of them, except for the ones that I just cited, I mean, we're talking about street drug pushing, basically, or domestic violence. So, well, no. Do keep in mind that Italy is a very particular context. First of all, because we don't have a very high number of foreign fighters. We have latest data quotes 125, and only 10 of them were Italian citizens, and 11 more with dual citizenship. The rest were foreigners, and that's a big point because we don't have the high numbers that other countries have. Second thing that impacts the Italian context is deportation. Like out of 42, 29 were deported. That's simple. Like in Italy, when someone is on the path to radicalization, we just simply deport him with an administrative measure. And that is part of the reason why it's not the whole reason, but it surely played a major role in containing the threat. And so, yeah, that's the situation in Italy.
Oliver, over to you, if I may. You have a microphone out there.
Thanks, Casper. If I may be allowed 20 seconds of inside baseball as well, to basically just say, it's been a long slog. It's been 2 years. Sure. Working together. It's the end of the report, and it could have been pretty complicated. It's one personally at Iris. It's one of the most technically complicated projects we've had to deal with because of the the empirical data set that we've had to manage. And paradoxically, it's also been one of the simplest because it's been always smooth and professional, our relationship with GLOBSEC. So I don't take this for granted because there are other projects which don't always work like that. I also say it's complicated because, to give you one quick example, because of the methodology. And so Casper broke my heart because there are, when you look at the report, there are X number of cases for France, but they're actually a bit like a Michael Jackson album. Is we've only selected the the 69 that can absolutely perfectly fit the methodology. We had 60 more, but if they don't fit the exact criteria for 2015, for the fact that some of these cases have not been convicted, then just to let you know the methodology behind this, there's a lot of sweat and tears on the GLOBSEC side and on our side that has gone in to produce this report. And also on a very personal level, I'm not as much of a specialist as some of you fine people on this panel, and it was very rewarding for me. I found it quite enjoyable happening upon some of these findings that I personally found counterintuitive, such as, for example, as on the nexus part, on the funding part. For example, when we kind of started to figure out that the more the illegal funding was significant, the less it was likely to have to do with jihadism or terrorism, simply because the business models were different. In the first case, it would be profit-oriented. In the second case, it would be ideologically oriented, and this kind of pointed us towards some of the conclusions that we have in the report, insofar as some of the funding has got more to do with smaller sums, which can actually be, in many cases, illegal, which have to do with salaries, with benefits, and simply with savings. Like any, like you'd have projects to go do a DPhil at university, you would save, or to buy a house, you would save. Well, some people would save with the view to act upon terrorist ideology. So that sort of stuff for me was at least counterintuitive. If you have like half a million circulating in a van of illegal contraband, then usually you're not going to risk it to fund terrorist activities, simply because as soon as you dip into terrorist activities, the network of police activity is much more precise and the risks are much higher. In terms of there are other characteristics of the nexus which appeared to me at least counterintuitive, but the one thing is that, as you said, Casper, unfortunately, France has the highest number of cases in Europe to examine, and it's also amongst the big data sets the one in which we most consistently found the crime-terror nexus. It oscillates according to the methodology you take between 40 and 50%. But again, a lot of that is more of the delinquent petty crime, or what you might call, in-betweener crime than, at least in the French case, than more serious crime.
Thank you, Olivier. And over to the Ghent University team, Wim.
Yeah, thank you, Casper. I will give a more general answer, and Tom will give some more specific cases or examples. For Belgium, we can see the remarkable result that more than half of the for terrorism convicted persons were known by official authorities for other crimes. So more than half had a crime history. So there was a strong link between previous crimes and between their terrorism offenses. And I hypothesize that this is in fact an underestimation of the total numbers, because we made use of open source materials. So I think when we do an in-depth file analysis of some police records and other official materials, we will see also some other little types of crime, petty crimes, that are not covered by, for example, the media sources that were available for now. So I think health is an underestimation. So we can conclude that, in fact, there is a link between crime and terrorism. And in my opinion, working on terrorism is working on crime. This means when you need to be tough on terrorism, you need to be tough on crime as well. So it's very important that you can be tough in a very early stadium on crimes of little criminals. But in the same way, you need to give some perspectives. Not only be tough on crime, but in the same way, you need to give some perspectives in a way that they can reintegrate their own lives, and that they can, on another way, invest in their successful way of living. So being tough on terrorism is being tough on the little crimes as well, in my opinion.
Thank you, Wim. Tom.
Yes, thanks Casper and the research team for inviting us in this interesting panel, although it's our own fault, as you say. Thank you anyway. Some additions to the things Wim already said. Almost 50 or around 50% of our cases had a criminal past. However, we have to mention that it is a snapshot in time and it is a snapshot in space. So we only looked at the Belgian cases, and we only looked around the cases arrested around 2015 in our own definition, but in the GLOBSEC definition, arrested in 2015. So they filtered out, as Olivier mentioned, some cases from our Belgian data set in the total data set. But there are some remarks because from a methodological point of view, we have used open sources indeed, and as mentioned by Anton Wening from the Dutch National Police, the open sources have some data constraints, as known, and official data will lead to higher shares of criminal past. So, as Wim mentioned, it will be an underestimation of the real number. Another methodological point is that police data itself has data constraints. These are well known. The so-called dark number is very large, so even though we look at the police data, it aren't all the registered crime, or it are just the registered crime data we're looking at, and not the real crime committed. So that's an important remark. And the last point is one from a definition perspective, because severe crime contains also terrorism, and there are some cases that are just only known for prior terrorism offenses. So when we filter those out, we just find criminal past of around 25%. So another 25% are the terrorism recidivist, or so you call it in the final report. When we look at the cases that have a criminal past, we find that mostly around 60% are convicted for severe crime, but in this case too, severe crime contains terrorism, so it will be, the share will be nuanced when you filter those out. So that's for the Belgian case.
Thank you for that. So just, ladies and gentlemen, just a quick point on this, that Tom used this number 50%, and then he said we take out 25 and we're just left with 25%. Well, for me that's quite still significant chunks. We've got 1 in every 4. That's still a significant chunk of the whole milieu. Yes, there is a big, and that's one of the key findings that we've got, that there is a huge recidivist, terrorism recidivist milieu, let's put it this way, that you've got these individuals, and especially the Belgian subset is littered with such individuals. But I wanted to pick up Olivier's point on successful criminals, kingpins, right? They wouldn't go down the jihadi path because it's better to be a kingpin. Now, I would like to ask everyone on the panel for the reaction. Is that the case? Because some of you have been saying, petty small crime, etc., etc. But at the same time, our overall subset, or the whole data set, is actually, there's quite a few of the guys who have been doing severe crime. One of the key findings for us was always the fact that it's not just petty guys. There are quite a few individuals who committed serious crime. Attempted murder, beatings, torture, things like that. So it's not just a guy who's pushing drugs in the street. Now, Olivier says a successful criminal, a severe criminal doesn't have to be successful. That's one thing. So my question to everybody, a successful criminal is not a jihadi because it's a loss of business, because it's a loss of opportunity, etc., etc., etc. How would you react? Giovanni, over to you.
Well, as I previously said, I'm referring exclusively to the Italian case, and I would say no, we haven't seen any kingpins, let's say. We have seen a network that was involved in human trafficking and financing on behalf of Al-Qaeda, but that is a single case. We have seen a link between organized crime in Kosovo and individuals that were active on Italian soil. There is a point to make. We worked mainly with open sources and legal papers, right? So, as the guys were saying, yeah, it's true. If you have access to a police database, that in most cases is confidential, the rate will go a little bit up. In the Italian specific case, the media is very invasive, which means that usually when we have someone who is either arrested or deported for extremism or terrorism, we will know, because they will tell you. Yeah, I mean, Anis Amri is a typical case. I mean, Anis Amri had been involved in criminal activity. He had been detained in Sicily, and he was killed by the police in Italy, and that is we consider it a very typical case, even if it's not from 2015. But the general opinion, at least in our case, is that usually organized crime and jihad don't really get along too well on Italian soil, because jihad attracts attention, right? And if the criminal activity is strictly linked to making money, then I guess that one of the last things you want to do is get involved in things that attract attention. I mean, of course it's not a general law, but from what we have seen, that is mostly the context, what's going on. Of course, I mean, it's obvious that we have cases from other years that involve, for example, illegal financial activities linked to jihad, but there is always some sort of link to extremist activities. So that is mostly the case, but I haven't seen any kingpin related to jihadist activity in Italy.
Thank you, Giovanni. Can you pass over to John, and then we'll go to the Belgian guys, and Olivier, you'll be last, because you raised the point on the in-betweeners and the successful criminals not being jihadists. John, over to you.
So it's an important question to ask. When we look at what we're talking about, if you're talking about severe criminality, this isn't not all the individuals who, in our cases, who had previously been involved in severe criminality, and as I said in my previous question, it's quite a low number. This was not organised criminality. This was not necessarily all about financial gain. There were one or two who were. One individual involved in armed robbery, one individual involved in money laundering. But as a whole, when we look at all of the 49 cases in the UK sample, similar to the Italian case, we're not seeing people who had a previous successful career in organised crime going on to be arrested for terrorism-related offences. One of the important points to make about my team is that we divided up. We had sort of two teams. One was looking at Britain and the other was looking at Northern Ireland. So together we were looking at the whole of the UK. When we looked at the Northern Irish cases, and my colleague Orla Lynch was leading this part of it, you would have seen more engagement from the violent Islam Republicans in organised criminality. Now, it wasn't that they were prior organised criminals and then went into terrorist activity. It was that the organised criminality was part and parcel of what they were doing as well. So that's an important point to make here when we're making this distinction. But yeah, no real kingpins here either.
No kingpins. Wim, over to you.
Yes, thank you. In our Belgian data, we don't really see bosses or kingpins as well. So the real successful criminals are not in our data, in our view. When you are a successful criminal, mostly you will not be caught by the police, you will not be in jail, etc. So I think we need to take into account a criminal career is most likely like a legal career. You want to be successful, you want to have fame, you want to have success, you want to make money in a short time in your career, and you want to use your skills to achieve that. So in our view, we have a lot of these kind of petty criminals, from small criminals to more severe criminals, that failed in achieving that success. And they feel at a certain time they will not be the successful criminal that they want to be. And at that point of time, I think they are very, very attractive to certain kinds of ideologies in which they can achieve that kind of fame. So at that moment, they become very vulnerable to let them out with this kind of activities. It's another way of achieving success, fame, etc. So in my view, these kind of ideologies is more a neutralization ground in which they try to achieve their success.
Thank you. Over to you, Tom.
Yeah, let me a small addition to that. A notable case is that we have some severe criminals in our data set, like the El Bakraoui brothers. They are known for severe crime, and that shows that they have, on an individual level, some characteristics that are useful in the sense of their terrorism future or something. How do you want to call it? So they are involved in rule-breaking behavior. They are taking risk on a criminal level or a terror level, and they have certain skills and connections, skills in staying under the radar to an extent, and connections in the criminal world, the criminal social networks. On another level, there is the same breeding ground for crime and for terror. So, like here in Brussels, the Zerkani network is known to recruit their foreign terrorist fighters from a certain area, which is also known for higher rates in crime. So that there are maybe 2 points that where crime and terror will.
Right. So you have a place where it converges, where both converge. Yeah. So Olivier, over to you. You provoked this part of the discussion.
So just maybe 2 quick points on France, which might explain also some of the discrepancies. First, to be transparent, is that for the French dataset, we didn't only use open source. So it's possible that this might skew some of the results, but we don't know. Second point is that I think obviously it's helpful analytically to distinguish, obviously between severe criminality and organized criminality. In the case of France, we have very little to no organized criminality. There's a number of reasons for this. One of them is the nature of the French state, which has a Ministry of the Interior with a network of préfectures, which covers the French territory and has a very kind of strong tradition of the Jacobin state, which has a historical culture of pride in the profession, which means that actually it's very good at, if you like, enforcing the idea of the French state in all of its unicity, if you like, and it has a number of, I mean, for good or bad, in this respect, it has results because it usually manages to dissolve or undermine if you like, the structuring, the crystallization of organized crime before it's too difficult to break down. So it would be a matter of, usually it's a matter of months.
Olivier, I'll just to all of you, maybe gentlemen, because you're saying there aren't that many organized criminals in the dataset, but you know the Europol's kind of the bar for organized crime definition, not only Europol's, but it's rather low. When I sometimes feel that we have not too many of us are on this panel, although Wim and Tom are an exception, are you know, and John as well, actually. So we have a 50-50 split. Sorry about that. Into criminology. And you know that it takes 3 people.
50% of us were criminals, part of organized
part
crime.
Part of organized crime, right? Yeah. So it's a crime.
Speak for yourself.
Yeah, I'm trying.
GLOBSEC is.
I'm trying my best. So you know, but basically you've got a 50-50 split here, and I think we sometimes in discussions like that related to terrorism, which are set in the kind of like political science or social science kind of like setting, we forget that one of the definitions on that is that basically to be an organized criminal, you need to be in a community of how many people? 3. Is that good enough? I mean, when you say we haven't got that many organized criminals, you know, it doesn't take, you know, you don't have to be Cosa Nostra to be an organized crime. You know, just let's put that on the table as well. And that kind of leads me to my next question. Do you see, and to all of you again, lifestyles? Some of you mentioned this. It picks up. They going out. Thomas, we were talking about certain localities that people go in and out of prison. That there are some breeding grounds, huge inverted commas here. Do you see that kind of a situation? You know, is this something that we should be looking at those lifestyles? That jihad could be a lifestyle, that criminality can be a lifestyle, that they can meet there without actually crossing the threshold from one to the other, so that the nexus, so to speak, is just a bit more subtle, if I can put it this way. Do you see that happening? Is this something that in the future, you know, the research should focus on? That, you know, we've got quite a few of the guys who are reoffenders, who have been in and out. That means they lead a certain life that maybe is a certain lifestyle. Half of the reoffenders are just terrorist reoffenders. Maybe we're missing something. We're looking at certain, you know, events. We're looking at snapshots. Maybe we should tackle them more, you know, broadly, if I can put it this way. Maybe the number of interventions should be more robust and start earlier. How do we tackle that? You know, how do we tackle those? Can we really? That's my question. I'm always we're always asked about recommendations. And you know, the nexus, you know, to some extent, in some different forms, it exists. How can we tackle that? If we see individuals who gravitate from one to the other, you're in-betweeners, Olivier, who then go back to those breeding grounds or not, but persevere in this. What do we do about this? Now let's turn away from, you know, from the research and the results. Let's turn away towards, you know, turn to what we could do about this. As this phenomenon, you know, Wim, you said, you know, Tom said just 25%. Well, it's not just 25%. What can we do about this? Maybe the Belgian team first gets this question.
I think, and it's already said a few times today, it's a very integral approach we need to put forward. You need to have some mechanisms at a macro, meso level, and you need to do something at an individual level. So I think there are some macro social things where you can work on as a community, as a municipality, as a local institution. For example, the inclusion in the society, the social cohesion in society, the poverty in society. A very important one is polarization. Try to work on these topics. But besides that, of course, you need to work on that individual level. And when you talk about lifestyle of individuals, that's a very important one, because we see, and we see it in our data as well, that these kind of individuals create certain routine activities during their young ages. And it is very difficult to break down that routine activities. So it's very important that you can do on early prevention and early detection. For example, today you have several programs that focus on strengthening the resilience of the youngsters. We heard in the previous sessions these kind of programs as well. That's one of the solutions you can put forward to work with this kind of people. But as I said in my introduction, it's very important as well to be tough on the little crimes and the little disorders and the little incivilities, that you give a signal as a public policy that it is not tolerated. And in that way, I think you can break down the routine activities of these kind of individuals in a very early stage of their life. When you wait too long with that, in my view, the chance becomes higher and higher that they will be involved in more serious types of crime. So, in my view, you need to work on different levels of analysis, but on that individual level, be tough on crime, but give some perspectives on each young individual.
Thank you, Wim. When we're talking prevention, because we're talking about, we're talking prevention here. Obviously, I need to turn to John. You're at the university in the UK. There's a big debate about, and anything that's related to prevention in the United Kingdom. That's what I want, where I wanted to go with our discussion, because I don't think we're going to fix it from just the macro level, as Wim said, that we're going to observe and arrest, intercept. Where is the micro? Where is the beginning, John? So that's what I wanted to ask you about, what we could do better here, given how you study the UK example.
So what we need to do is utilize research like we've done here as a starting point. As a starting point, we've got the quantitative data here, but it doesn't tell us how these people are understanding their own trajectory from their prior non-involvement in any form of terrorist activity to appearing in our data set, being convicted under terrorist offences. One of the things that we need to think about, and this would probably require more taking a step back with some qualitative research, what we need to think about is, how do they understand their communities? We can't be imposing and saying, okay, we see X, Y, and Z from our data. We see that they've been involved in X, Y, and Z, so therefore this must mean this. We need to listen. We need to listen to why and how people are moving into these forms of activity. One of the things that we can look at is the role that their community, the role that their broader social ecology plays. Are there places? It's not about the individual per se, but we need to also think about where. It's not just who, it's where is this happening. And where isn't sitting down and saying, in Britain it's this, in Italy it's this, in France it's this, in Belgium it's this. It's where in Britain. It's where in London. It's where in East London. It's where in Leytonstone, for example. Let's get much more focused in. We need to be able to match research like this with that. So we need to look at the where. We need to get that understanding. We need to see if there are communities which, not just focus on the mosque, focus on how the person defines their community, their online and offline community, and see what the influences are. Who is trusted as well? Because what we see in research time and time again is that people are joining these terrorist groups because they distrust auspices of the state a lot of the time, and that they're trusting individuals and the ideology being put forward by individuals within these networks. It's not just enough to say, well, the ideology says this, so that is the reason why someone is joining as well. We need to understand, take away the ideology and think about, okay, what is it that drew these people in? A lot of the times we find that ideology has nothing to do with it until you're getting longer into the group as well. So we need to understand all of those bits. I know this isn't really the answer you're looking for, but these are all questions that we need to be addressing, and we need to be taking a step back and looking at it from the individual's perspectives who are involved.
Thank you, John. So essentially, we should all become ethnographers and anthropologists. So stay tuned for that. Giovanni, Italy's different case here. We're not talking communities, or are we? How does that square against what you've just heard and the question of those lifestyles? Because from what you were saying, I got the impression that Italy does not have the time to register if the guy had a lifestyle because he's deported. How does that work?
Well, it's not necessarily like that. Let's put it this way. I think that the preventive strategy and the repressive strategy need to go side by side, right? So, in our case, at least for the year 2015, we have seen that two major issues regarding radicalized individuals were a low educational level and an unstable employment situation. And when I say unstable, I mean temporary jobs that last like 2-3 months at the most, black labor, which is very common. And that's a big issue because the individual will just not integrate into society. Another issue is the low educational level. What does that mean? It means that the individuals will probably rely on their own sub-community. They will rely on some local preacher that has no qualification to preach, or even worse, on the web or on both. And that's every case needs to be analyzed individually because it has its own characteristics. But that is the main point. So first of all, a preventive measure means finding the proper way to have the individuals integrated into society. And that is one thing. The thing of deportation, it's not like automatically like, okay, he might be a radical, so let's deport him. It's a bit more complex. It basically works like this. The police, DIGOS, basically conducts an investigation and files a report. If there's sufficient material to consider the individual a danger to society, the Ministry of Interior just signs an expulsion request, and the guy is placed on a plane. But it's not like I mean, you need evidence. It doesn't just happen like this. One thing that is worth considering is that Italy, due to the years that, especially the 60s and the 70s, where we had major issues with extreme left terrorism and extreme right terrorism, red brigades and autonomia operaia and all that stuff, we managed to acquire some experience, and a lot of what's going on with current strategy, especially on a human intelligence level, is a heritage of these years. So that's one thing that I believe is working on the investigative part. Keep in mind that not even a year ago, the Italian government went all the way to Brazil to arrest an extreme left-wing terrorist that was wanted and was hiding in Brazil. It took years, but eventually it was done. So I think that the two things go together. For instance, regarding the foreign fighters, I remember before someone asked what happens to European countries, like do they take them back, do they don't take them back? In the case of Italy, well, we had a very low number. We're talking about 11 citizens. The Italian law says that they will be taken back, and they will put in jail. It would also be a very good source of intelligence, in my point of view, having them back. But that's just my point of view. But overall, I think that the two lines, the preventive and the repressive, need to go side by side, and specifically on single cases. I mean, there's no general law. See what I mean?
Okay, so be specific and use these two strands.
Yes.
Olivier, last word belongs to you, and then I turn over to the audience.
Well, as you can expect, Casper, I'm going to be difficult. But then again, I'm French, so I have an excuse. I'm going to take issue with your initial question. I think the answer to your question is to stop asking that question. So in that respect, I very much agree with John, is to kind of resist the temptation to say, right, we've done the research, it's complicated. Now we need to find solutions and we need to act quickly. We need to find recommendations which will work in the short term. We had a prime minister who was called Manuel Valls, who said, I mean, it was there was a context, of course, to this, but he said, expliquer, c'est excuser. So explaining things, analyzing things, is excusing things in the context of the terrorist attacks. So, it might remind you of a statement by Michael Gove in the Brexit debate when he said, this country has had enough of experts. We are in a period where there is a strong political pressure to try and explain things away. We need to act. This is particularly the case in the area, of course, of terrorism, because of the dramatic consequences it has on the lives of people. So there is an even stronger political pressure to act quickly, and in order to act quickly, you need to understand quickly. So usually it means acting in one way, and you will explain this in one way. So you will have a kind of monofactor explanation so that then you can act fast and you can basically have something to show for and tell the population, look, this is the magic wand. This is what happened in France with the whole de-radicalization debate. So we put in place de-radicalization mechanisms, which were basically, we just basically found in a, I want to stay polite, but which came out of the blue, basically. And France is learning the lessons from this and is progressively making progress and in more effective de-radicalization strategies. What I personally, learned from this project is actually that, is actually to deconstruct our kind of what I would call the Hollywood, the Hollywood tendencies that have, which are particularly pregnant when it comes to, unfortunately, to terrorism. There's a kind of there's the whole imagination which is at stake that a lone wolf who, for example, radicalizes quickly, and then as soon as you look at the data set, you can't substantiate that. There's a whole imagination at stake which say, it's very localized. In France, for example, it will be la région parisienne, and then when you look into it, you actually have it's territorialized, but in a number of places in the south, Haute-Garonne, Alpes-Maritimes, in the north. So as soon as you look into those kind of big explanations, they're undermined immediately. When you kind of say, look, it's got to do with disenfranchised youth who have economic problems, then you look into the cases and I see that other factors are at play, such as, Salafist ideology, the wars and the failed states on international terms. So actually, you have to bring into play the international factors. You have to bring into play the transnational factors. For example, the continuum with Belgium. So as soon as you look at the national factors, when you think it's the particularities, actually they are pretty much always linked with the transnational factors and the international factors. And in reverse, when you look at the kind of international factors and you say, this is because of the wars we've generated in countries and we have created failed states, as soon as you kind of look into the cases, you always also see domestic factors. So what I'm saying is it's a multifactorial.
It's complicated. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, and you basically, as John was saying, that's basically the very first brick. It's the first step. If you want to be able to act, you can't wish this away. You can't wish away the fact that the world is complicated. That's actually where you need to. That's actually where you need to start. I'm sorry, this is of course not very practical.
It's a fantastic impractical answer, but it provokes discussion.
I think that is the most practical answer, because everything we've tried to do in practical terms, which hasn't been based on this, has been a failure. Deradicalisation in France is the prime example.
Fantastic. Thank you, Olivier. Thank you, gentlemen. Over to the audience. Are there any questions to our panelists? Any questions on the research that they've been doing, the cases that they've been covering, the nationalities, the local situation, inverted commas? Please feel free to ask the questions now. We've got one, Rosica.
Hi, Rosica from Bulgaria. One question to the Italian context, Giovanni. Although you said actually organized crime and terrorists don't go along so well on Italian territory, I'm thinking of the prison environment, and this goes beyond the research project, because as far as I know, those terrorist offenders that are categorized as the highest risk in Italian prisons are strictly separated from the organized crime bosses because of some dangerous links, possibly. Do you have any examples of what kind of interactions or links could have been built in Italian prisons, or is it more like a precautionary measure? And well, this is one of the questions because it's interesting. Italy is, of course, a separate case, but it's also an interesting case because of the organized crime phenomenon and your experience with that. And secondly, do you think that in Italy the approach, especially in prison, towards organized crime and rehabilitation has to some extent informed also the approach towards terrorist offenders? So,
yeah, Giovanni, over to you. Thank you, Rosica.
Regarding radicalization in prison, it is obviously an issue. Let's point this out. It is an issue because in prison there are individuals, often low criminals who embrace religion in jail. Eventually, not necessarily due to some preachers, because now we're careful about monitoring preachers, but even on their own. And considering that prison is a restrictive environment, it is very likely that they go and find into an extreme view of religion, some sort of how can we call it? Way to make their situation less heavy. But I would not say that it has anything to do with organized crime or high-level criminality. I mean, it can influence like drug pushers or violent individuals, but not necessarily on a high level. The fact that they're separated, it's just to avoid that the problem expands. The problem expands, right? But I would not say that it's something strong. Let's say. I'm sorry. What was the second question? That's fine. Okay.
Any further questions, ladies and gentlemen? There is one. Okay.
Thanks. I'm going to be slightly challenging, Olivier. What I heard towards the end of what you were saying felt like a very elegant prescription for not doing very much, or at least for not doing very much very quickly. And I have great respect for the academics involved in this debate. I'm a practitioner. I come from a different operational perspective. But I do realise and recognise the value of expert opinion in this highly contested area. But what I want to know from you is, I guess, from you and the panel, what should the appetite for risk be? Clearly that French experiment failed, but actually we don't know very much about what works at the minute. And if we're to find out what works in countering this pernicious and extremely lethal threat that we face from violent extremism, we're going to have to, in my view, take some risks. I'd just like to understand what you think of that as a kind of approach.
Thank you, Ian. Take some risks, Olivier.
That's a very good question to which I have absolutely no answer. But I suppose it, as you know, it very much depends on the on the political debate of the moment and whether it's the political context is heated or not. The example was mentioned of the plane with and the jihadi children that Macron basically attempted to tackle as an issue, and unfortunately the conditions weren't there for the issue to be tackled in a way that wasn't political. And I think compared to Manuel Valls, for whom intellect I don't think was his forte, he wanted to appear like someone who was tough. I think that our current president might be a bit more cerebral, but I think unfortunately because all of this is so close in time, it's still so vivid in the flesh, if you like, of the French population that I can only acknowledge that this debate cannot be led in scientific terms, in analytic terms. It's inescapably in political terms, and I'm afraid on this terrain there are people who know how to deal with this much better than I do. All I can really say is that, you know, when I look at the data, people tend to, you know, simplify it in time and space. In space, they think it's very localized. In time, they think it's very recent. And you just have to say, well, actually, if you look at the territorialization of the threat, if you look back in the 90s, the 80s, in these same territories, be it in the south, in the north, with the Afghan wars, you actually had similar situations, and obviously of a scale that is not quite the same as we have today. So just, you know, that's what I would call a nexus, really. Is the nexus, in Latin, is basically what binds two things together, and I think there's the nexus between crime and terror. But in this case, I think there's also the nexus between the national factors, the transnational factors, and the international factors. And I'm afraid that's that's what I can contribute to the debate, but I'm incompetent. I acknowledge my incompetence in the political sphere, and I'm sorry about that.
So I'll pass on the microphone to, thank you, Olivier. I'll pass on to John, who wants to step in and do it.
It's a hugely important question. It's so easy for us to sit here and say, oh no, you need to take a step back, you need to understand, and so on. And but what we need to do, sometimes the riskiest thing is not to take a risk, not to take what is a perceived risk as well. So we look at examples like counter-narrative campaigns that are put out there, and we think just about, okay, what can be said to counter the ideology that's being put forward by the group. But if there hasn't been the step beforehand to try and understand, well, is it these narratives that are the reason why someone is joining the group? If that step isn't taken, then the counter-narrative can be obsolete. The counter-narrative can be counterproductive. The counter-narrative can be seen as, this is the auspices of the state telling us what to do, telling us what our religion or our ideology X, Y, and Z is like. So we need to be able to join up that thinking, to join up from this excellent research that's done here, but then to try and get that in-depth understanding to see, okay, we know who is joining up. Now we need to know why, we need to know how, etc. We need to as well be able to, and like the question you asked me previously, which I completely dodged and gave you an answer about to a different question that I wanted to answer, was really, you were directing it about prevent. That's what you were talking about. And prevent is one of the reasons, the great things about prevent is this multi-agency approach that we've got. We can't just look at terrorism, why people are involved in terrorism, from a policing or a security point of view. We can't just look at it as, I'm a psychologist by training, even though I'm now within a criminology department. We can't just look at the criminologists or psychologists. We can't just talk to the theologians. We can't just talk to the social workers. We can't just talk to the youth workers. We have to have everyone talking together. And Prevent gets a really bad rap. But I think that's something that they're doing well and that they've tried to do well as well. So I think that is one thing that we have to do. Another thing that we have to do as well is to show that that we are holding people to account by the rule of law. That it's not saying, okay, this is an extreme example, so therefore we have to have an extreme way of dealing with it as well. One of the problems with terrorism is the word terrorism. One of the problems with terrorists is the word terrorist. It exaggerates people's reaction. And in no way am I saying that this isn't a huge major issue. This is the reason why I've become involved in this research. But if we are to take away the political aspect of it, if we're to take away the terrorism aspect of it, we have a huge knowledge from a background in security studies, in crime science, in criminology, to understand why people commit acts of crime. If we're to utilise that alongside all of that other knowledge there, to think about how we're going to prevent it situationally, so utilise something like situational crime prevention, which we see anywhere we go here in Brussels, in London, in Paris, wherever we go. If we utilise all those other preventions, those mechanisms that are in place to prevent people from being involved in criminality, while I'm saying that there isn't a crime-terror nexus here, what I'm not saying is that the reason why people are becoming involved in terrorism is different to the reason why others become involved in crime. There's a colleague of mine, Noemi Buhana, who says that she wants people to get away from this crime-terror nexus word. She says it's a crime-crime nexus. That if by getting away from terrorism, we can take a step back and be able to look a bit more logically at it and see not just that we have to take risks, but there is research that's backing up ways to prevent people becoming involved in this kind of actions outside of terrorism, and we need to draw on that expertise from elsewhere as well.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you could join me in thanking our panelists. So that was it.